A needle in a haystack. Have you ever really thought about trying to find a needle in a haystack? It's not just that you're seeking a very small target in a very broad field. It's that every single piece of hay looks like your needle. How would you go about it? Is there a strategy to it? Is the needle more likely to filter its way down to a certain part of the haystack? Does the search disturb the needle more? Do you methodically sift through each and every blade of dried grass until your fingers close around something metallic? Do you just tear at it? Go to town on that hay bale? Are there any tools you could use? Where would you even start? The bottom? The top? Do you focus on one section of the stack before moving on to another? Do you make horizontal passes, kind of zigzag your way through it? And there are other variables. Does being in the haystack transform the needle, perhaps slowly eroding it with small amounts of mud and rainwater or dew? Is time on your side, or is there a clock ticking down to some uncertain time? Do you slowly lose your mind when faced with the futility of it all? Does it even matter if you find the needle at this point? Do you even want to? Okay, you understand what I'm getting at here. How do you find a 270-meter ship in a 106 square kilometer ocean? Hell, even narrowing that down to 10 or 20 square kilometers, you're looking at astronomical odds. And yet, in 1985, after more than 73 years on the ocean floor, Titanic's final resting place was found. My name is Amanda Hoopman, and this is a story that represents the culmination of 7 decades of technological progress and even promises its fair share of crackpot theories, scientific rivalries, and covert naval operations. This is the story of how the once great White Star liner was lost and found again after Titanic. Finding the wreck of the Titanic was first proposed within days of the sinking. Vincent Astor suggested finding the wreck near its last reported position by using soundings, and then using explosives to free his father's body, which he'd assumed was tangled somewhere within the wreckage. Luckily, J.J. Astor was found floating in his lifebelt soon after, no explosives needed. Following the outbreak of the First World War, interest in Titanic waned. To be fair, people had bigger issues to worry about, until the post-war period. In 1953, a Southampton-based salvage company, Risdon Beasley Limited, launched the first serious, albeit unsuccessful, attempt to locate the Titanic wreck site. And in 1955, Walter Lord published A Night to Remember. A Night to Remember, which spawned both film and television adaptations of the same name, was the first definitive book on the Titanic disaster. For 6 decades, it was considered the Titanophile's Bible. The publication of 2013's On a Sea of Glass introduced Titanic nerds to a new Bible, and now A Night to Remember and On a Sea of Glass are like the Old and New Testament. Growing interest in Titanic throughout the 1960s and into the 1970s spawned renewed plans and attempts to locate and salvage the wreck, from the legitimate to the cockamamie. A British Titanophile, Douglas Woolley, announced plans to locate and salvage her using a bunch of nylon balloons. 4 years before the wreckage was actually found, Woolley claimed that he actually filed for the salvage rights with the British Board of Trade, but the legality of his claims didn't seem to be taken very seriously. As early as 1973, a PhD candidate working with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Robert Ballard, expressed his desire to locate the infamous wreck site. Robert Dwayne Ballard was born in landlocked Kansas, but when he was still a toddler, his family moved to California, where he spent his childhood marveling at the tiny worlds he observed in local tide pools. He was in love with the ocean. The first time he saw the 1954 film adaptation of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, little Robert Ballard decided that that's what he wanted to be when he grew up: Captain Nemo. As a high school junior, he was awarded a scholarship to a summer research program with the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. While achieving his bachelor's in chemistry and geology at UC Santa Barbara, Ballard, son of a military man himself, participated in the Reserve Officer Training Corps. While at the University of Hawaii, pursuing his master's in geophysics, he went out one night with one of his Army friends on leave from Vietnam. After getting a few beers, the friend described to Ballard the act of gunning down Vietnamese civilians from helicopters. Ballard was horrified. After this, Ballard put in a request to be transferred from the Army to the Navy Reserves. When he was eventually called to active duty in 1967, it was as an oceanographer. Robert Ballard had originally intended on Scripps for his graduate degree, the Marine Institute he'd studied with for a summer in his teens. His GPA during his final semester in undergrad at UC Santa Barbara was only around a 3.0, but Ballard was certain that his high school internship, combined with his interdisciplinary major at UCSB and his ROTC designation as a distinguished military graduate, were enough for the admissions board to overlook the odd D grade here and there. His admissions interview was with the director of the Marine Physical Laboratory at Scripps and later director of the institution as a whole, Fred Speece. The interview did not go well, and when Robert Ballard's rejection letter came, it was from Dr. Speece himself. Thus began a perhaps one-sided rivalry between Ballard and Speece, whom Ballard frequently refers to in various biographies as his nemesis. Ballard went on to complete his master's at the University of Hawaii before beginning his PhD in marine geology at the University of Southern California, which he ultimately completed at the University of Rhode Island after being called to active duty with the Navy. The relatively small oceanographic community meant that Dr. Ballard and Dr. Speece regularly came into contact with one another through competing and sometimes joint expeditions, and according to Ballard, a friendly rivalry broke out between the two. They even occasionally talked about teaming up to find the Titanic. Through his career in the Navy, Ballard became inextricably linked with the Woods Hole Institute, Scripps's East Coast rival. Luckily for Ballard, Woods Hole had one thing that Scripps didn't: Alvin. Alvin is a crude deep-sea submersible, and at the time, it was the only one of its kind in the United States. Also, I say is because Alvin is still in operation. That submersible was commissioned in 1964, and Alvin is still truckin'. As part of his PhD research, collecting data to document the theory of plate tectonics, Ballard regularly took Alvin out to the bottom of the Gulf of Maine, and he accompanied a team of researchers to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge as part of Project Famous, the first manned mission to explore the tectonic plate boundary. Still a graduate student at the time, Ballard described himself in his memoir, Into the Deep, as the only Mister in the group. Though Alvin is an extraordinarily well-built submersible, so much that it's seen more than 60 years of service, it constantly occurred to Ballard what kind of danger manned deep-sea missions posed. One tiny accident or mistake could result in a catastrophic implosion that would kill everyone aboard the submersible within fractions of a second. Ballard wondered if there wasn't a safer way, if the solution didn't lie in the then nascent field of robotics. Could an unmanned submersible controlled by a team at the surface not do all of the work they were putting their lives at risk to do? The search for Titanic's wreckage had long been many a marine archaeologist's white whale. By 1977, Dr. Robert Ballard was a professor at Woods Hole on track for tenure. He had also advised on a number of National Geographic pieces and documentaries, including one about the hunt for the Loch Ness Monster. So a number of Woods Hole officials reminded Dr. Ballard that a search for the famed lost ship might be beneath the dignity of a serious research institution. But Woods Hole's director, Paul Fye, took another position on the matter. Titanic was located somewhere in the Northwest Atlantic, basically Woods Hole's backyard. It would be terribly embarrassing for the Institute if the California-based Scripps launched a mission to find her and were successful. So, Dr. Ballard sought out the aluminum company Alcoa to ask permission to borrow a ship, Sea Probe, that had originally been built to search for ancient shipwrecks in the Black Sea. Dr. Fye, who was just about to retire, gave Ballard the green light to test out Sea Probe at Woods Hole for the express purpose of a mission to find Titanic. Ballard borrowed over $600,000 of additional equipment, cameras, a sonar system, etc., from Westinghouse, the Navy, and a Massachusetts-based oceanographic instruments company called Benthos, and set sail into the Atlantic in October 1977. On Sea Probe's very first sonar run, a connection between two pipes broke, and all $600,000 worth of equipment plummeted to the sea floor. At this point, Paul Fye had already retired, and Woods Hole's interim team were prepared to make Robert Ballard, a professor of marine geology on a professor's salary, pay for the lost equipment. Luckily, Alcoa swooped in with an insurance policy that covered the borrowed instruments, but Woods Hole's new director, John Steele, informed Ballard that he was not to do anything else under the Institute's name that had anything to do with Titanic. Dr. Robert Ballard was not easily dissuaded. He might not be able to use Woods Hole's name, equipment, or facilities to find Titanic, but the Institute couldn't prevent him from his own private pursuits. He formed a company called Psionics International in partnership with Titanic expert Bill Tantum, photographer Emery Christoph, and film producer Alan Ravenscroft, with the express purpose of raising funds to develop deep-towed visual imaging vehicles in order to locate the Titanic. A brief word about Bill Tantum. William Tantum was very much the heart and soul of psionics. Until he met Bill, Robert Ballard's interest in finding Titanic was rooted in the challenge and academic merit such a discovery would bestow upon the scientist or adventurer who'd first made it. He likened Titanic to the Mount Everest of marine archaeology and wished to be the first to summit. Bill Tantum had had a love affair with Titanic since he was about 6 or 7 years old. Bill and his father were passengers aboard the Canadian Pacific steamer Duchess of Atoll in 1937 when she collided with the Danish collier Maine. The Duchess only sustained minor damage, but when the passengers, clad in their life jackets, mustered at their stations, little Bill heard the names of famous ships and the stories of their infamous disasters uttered for the first time. Empress of Ireland, Lusitania, Titanic. As Bill Tantum grew, so did his obsession with Titanic. By the time he and Dr. Ballard met, Bill was considered to be one of the world's foremost experts on the ship, garnering the name Mr. Titanic. Through his friendship with Bill, Bob Ballard developed a newfound respect and reverence for the great ocean liner. To find her wreckage would not only be to find the answer to a great mystery, but to bring a sense of closure to an incalculable tragedy. Bill believed wholeheartedly that Ballard would be the one to find the wreck and provide a much-needed epilogue to the story of Titanic. He believed in Ballard, even at times Ballard didn't believe in himself. Ballard's quixotic ambitions suddenly had very real stakes. One by one, each of Psionics International's potential investors, including Roy Disney, turned down the project. citing the enormous capital it would take to fund the mission. Well, almost every investor turned down the project. Texas oil magnate Jack Grimm was very interested in funding a Titanic expedition. Jack Grimm was, as they say, an eccentric. He made his millions drilling wildcat oil wells and used his fortune to fund expeditions in search of the Loch Ness Monster, the abominable snowman, and Noah's Ark. With the search for Titanic, he at least set his sights on something that definitely existed. But a few negotiations between Emery Kristoff and Jack Grimm left the Sea Onyx crew feeling uneasy at the prospect of working with the oil tycoon. In 1979, plans to mount a Titanic expedition were placed firmly on the back burner, as the team at Sea Onyx, alongside some of Emery Kristoff's colleagues from National Geographic, quietly tinkered away at developing new cameras to use at depth. Bill Tantum, only about 50 years of age, was already beginning to see his health fade, though his passion for the Titanic project never did. But the project was indefinitely stalled for lack of funds. To make matters worse, Jack Grimm announced that he'd be teaming up with Lamont Doherty Geographical Observatory and Scripps to mount an expedition in search of Titanic. Leading that expedition would be none other than Ballard's personal nemesis, Dr. Fred Speece. In June of 1980, a stroke killed Bill Tantum, and for a while the dream of finding Titanic went with him. That same year, Jack Grimm and the Scripps team departed on their expedition in search of the ship, and Robert Ballard quietly packed away any hopes that he and the team over at Sea Onyx would prevail in their own mission to find her. The Scripps team used Deep Tow, a near-range sonar system that was towed along behind a mothership at extreme depths to comb the area for objects that could be Titanic. The mission was plagued with bad weather and an even worse angel investor who demanded on calling the shots. For Jack Grimm, the hunt for Titanic was as much a publicity stunt as it was an academic pursuit. He hoped that his search, if successful, would result in at least one film adaptation, and arranged for a monkey to point at a spot on a map where the Titanic could be, so that he could send his team to comb the monkey spot. Because he thought that that would be more interesting for the movie. When the scientists on the mission objected to the monkey plan, he threatened to fire the scientists. Ultimately, however, common sense prevailed and the monkey idea was dropped. When 14 objects large enough to be Titanic were detected by Deep Tow, Jack Grimm demanded that the Scripps team announce to the press that they had found her. Dr. Speece and Dr. Bill Ryan of Lamont Doherty declined to do so until each of the 14 targets could be confirmed or ruled out. And they were ruled out. Just big undersea rocks. All 14. In June of 1981, Jack Grimm and the Scripps team launched a second expedition in search of Titanic. On this expedition, Grimm claimed that they discovered one of Titanic's propeller blades. A mosaic image of what looks very much like a propeller blade from a steamship was produced, although no other wreckage or evidence was found. Could she be nearby? Perhaps buried under layers of silt and mud, a result of the 1929 Grand Banks earthquake that had rocked the area. Speece and Ryan were not convinced that the propeller was even that, but Grimm ran to the media with his claim that he had found Titanic, or at least a part of Titanic, and the media ran with it. Robert Ballard read about Jack Grimm's discovery in the papers, his hopes of finding Titanic all but dashed. Ronald Reagan had just taken office. There was a Cold War. Dr. Ballard had been a military man himself. He knew that if you were looking for someone to sponsor scientific research, the United States military had deep pockets and an interest in technology. He sought the backing of the Office of Naval Research for the development of 2 pieces of deep-sea visual imaging hardware, Jason and Argo, named after the Greek mythological hero Jason, who departed on a quest to seek out the Golden Fleece on his ship, Argo. Jason, the robotic submersible, not the man, would be a vehicle fitted with hydraulic arms, lights, and a camera for surveying the ocean floor. Jason would ride down to the ocean floor on Argo, a sled also mounted with a film camera and tethered to a mothership at the surface. Deploying a fair bit of salesmanship, Dr. Ballard pitched deep-sea exploration to the Navy as a matter of national security. After all, the planet's oceans also contain some of its largest mountain ranges. Could the Soviets not hide enemy submarines in these mountains and crevasses that Americans were neglecting to explore? Enemy submarines, as it turned out, were not the Navy's chief concern. Rather, the Navy concerned Bob Ballard with a couple of missing American submarines: USS Thresher and USS Scorpion. Thresher and Scorpion were both nuclear submarines that went down in the 1960s. Searches after their disappearances proved fruitful, and the Navy knew where both vessels lie, but they needed Ballard and his team to produce more sophisticated images of the wrecks than the Navy had been capable of nearly 2 decades earlier, and, more importantly, they needed Ballard's team to survey the wreck of Scorpion for any leaked radiation and environmental damage potentially caused by the sub's nuclear reactors and nuclear-tipped torpedoes. The military needed all of this to be done in secret, and Bob Ballard's not-so-secret obsession with finding Titanic proved a perfect cover story. The Navy and Dr. Ballard could simply claim that the military was sponsoring his search for Titanic in some vague pursuit of technological advancement. In reality, the survey of Thresher and Scorpion would be Ballard's primary aim, and once he fulfilled his assignment, he would be allotted the remaining time and budget to look for Titanic. Many of Ballard's own crew weren't even aware of the classified naval assignment, which meant that he and the few crew members with security clearance had to play dumb when they were searching for the Titanic near the Azores. After completing the surveys of Thresher and Scorpion, the team had only 12 days to conduct their actual search. Ballard's team aboard RV Nord were joined by a team of French colleagues, headed by oceanographer Jean-Louis Michel. The French team would first conduct a sonar search, and the Americans would follow with a visual search using Jason and Argo. Sonar was the traditional way of searching for undersea objects, but it had its drawbacks. Where Titanic was eventually found, for example, was an area near a deep canyon. Canyons create echoes which can muddy sonar images and disguise wrecks within. Sonar is also best for locating large, recognizable objects, but things can get iffy when you're not looking at a single intact piece of wreckage. When Ballard and his team were collecting data on the 2 submarines, Thresher and Scorpion, Ballard noticed how the implosions of both vessels scattered pieces of wreckage across a massive debris field. Submarine implosions are sudden, violent events. Matter implodes, then explodes, then implodes again very suddenly, creating an enormous field of debris. A ship sinking wouldn't scatter debris nearly as far, but some debris would scatter. Ballard recalled survivor Jack Thayer. The academic consensus was that Titanic sunk in one piece, but several witnesses to the sinking insisted that the ship broke in 2. Jack Thayer, one of the last survivors to leave the ship, described the split to a passenger aboard the rescue ship Carpathia, who sketched a series of images on a napkin depicting the liner sinking in 2 halves. If Titanic did split before she sank, then she would have left a significant debris field, perhaps more than a mile across. When the French team's sonar failed to find the wreckage, Ballard adjusted the target for the Argo team. They wouldn't look for a ship, They look for debris. This was a task that only a visual search could accomplish. Debris on sonar just looks like rocks on the ocean floor, or nothing at all. But with Jason and Argo, Ballard and his team could cast a wider net. They didn't need to find the ship, just the debris, which they could follow like breadcrumbs to the rest of the wreckage. Jean-Louis Michel was in charge of the watch around 1 a.m. on September 1st, 1985, when Bill Lang and Stu Harris spotted something odd on the video monitor. The sleepy night watch suddenly became alert. Then seconds later, the images on Argo's cameras became clear. Wreckage. The team began to shriek with glee. Argo and Jason had found a ship's boiler identical to the ones that had been fitted to Titanic. Afraid to take their eyes off the monitor, someone sent the ship's cook to retrieve Bob Ballard from his cabin. Moments later, Ballard bounded into the room. The crew sipped on fizzy Portuguese wine as the first images of Titanic's hull came into view. The entire expedition broke into a chaotic, jubilant hullabaloo. The American and French teams hugged and congratulated one another on their combined victory. And then someone, no one remembers who anymore, let the air out of the room like a helium balloon. They recalled that it was nearly 2 a.m. It was almost the time Titanic sank. "20 minutes later, Dr. Robert Ballard raised the Harland and Wolff flag on the fantail of the Nore. The crew that discovered the wreck of the Titanic observed a moment of silence for each of the 1,500 souls lost in that very spot 73 years earlier. The discovery of the wreck of Titanic, lying in two distinct pieces more than half a kilometer apart, proved once and for all that the ship split before she sank. Even after her discovery, Titanic's allure still has a hold on the public. She is the most studied shipwreck in the world and has been the subject of dozens of manned and unmanned expeditions, and hundreds of objects have been salvaged from her wreck site. But that's a story for another episode. Following the discovery of Titanic, Dr. Robert Ballard became a celebrity in the world of oceanography and the hard sciences overall. Weird story, in the immediate aftermath of the discovery, Ballard was invited to a formal White House dinner. He had no idea how to behave at a White House event, so he asked his good friend, Shirley Temple Black. As in, Shirley Temple. The Shirley Temple.
Animal crackers in my soup, monkeys and rabbits loop the loop.
And after she told him what to wear and where to stay and how to behave, Ballard attended said White House dinner, which just so happened to be the same dinner where Princess Diana danced with John Travolta in that unbelievable blue velvet dress, like it was the most iconic dinner of the 80s. Robert Ballard would go on to discover the wrecks of the Bismarck and PT-109, as well as a number of ancient shipwrecks in the Black Sea, and to survey famous shipwrecks like Lusitania, and to serve as an advisor on the 1997 James Cameron film. In 1989, he founded the Jason Project, partly in response to the number of fan letters he received from children following the discovery of Titanic. The Jason Project's aims are to inspire children to pursue scientific interests through learning programs and mentorship from real scientists from organizations like NASA and NOAA. The Jason Project's curricula is available for free online. In 2021, the Navy declassified the details of the Thresher and Scorpion missions, freeing Bob Ballard to finally discuss the details of his Titanic search that wasn't completely a Titanic search. There are other Navy missions, so he claims, that remain firmly classified and he is not currently at liberty to discuss. The loss of the RMS Titanic in 1912 was a devastating human tragedy. But since the wreck's discovery in 1985, continued study of the site has revealed that the remains of the ship have enjoyed a second life as the home to many animal species. Stick around after the credits to learn more. After Titanic is a podcast by Bashback Productions, written, recorded, and edited by Amanda Hoopman. Music by Neely Farrell, artwork by Paul Scott Canavan. Full cast list, transcripts, and sources are available on AfterTitanic.com. After Titanic is supported by our generous Indiegogo backers and patrons. Help support the podcast by heading to patreon.com/AfterTitanic, where you'll get exclusive access to our Discord server and to join an entire community of fellow Titanophiles to hang out with between episodes. I've been your host, Amanda Hoopman. Thanks for listening. When Robert Ballard and his team discovered the wreck of Titanic in 1985, they noticed what looked like icicles made of rust hanging from her hull and railings. Ballard fittingly named these rusticles, and it turns out they are evidence that Titanic is teeming with life. Rusticles are the byproduct of a bacterium, Halomanus titanicae, that was first identified at the wreck site. The bacterium feeds on the iron of the ship and is of particular interest to scientists for its potential use in the recycling of decommissioned deep-sea drilling materials. While Halomanus titanicae has spent over a century feeding on Titanic and hasn't quite managed to turn her into a rust stain on the bottom of the Atlantic yet, it could be a valuable natural resource for undoing some of the damage of anthropogenic oceanic pollution. And bacteria aren't the only creatures living on Titanic. Rat-tail fish, squat lobsters, bamboo corals, starfish, and many more deep-sea species have made their homes amid her ruins. And an overall increase in benthic fauna has been observed since 1985. Bamboo coral in particular has seen a substantial increase in colonies since the discovery of the wreck. And squat lobsters, a kind of hermit crab, have been found in greater numbers among Titanic's debris field than in a nearby sea ridge. Ongoing study of the sea life around the wreck can inform scientists on the management of both ecological and deep-sea heritage sites, as well as the population resilience of these enigmatic creatures who have made their homes in the once great ocean liner.